He was just trying to cash his paycheck until the bank manager accused him of fraud and locked the doors. Within minutes, police swarmed the lobby with guns drawn, and none of them asked a single question. Outside, his mother begged them not to shoot. Inside, he whispered, "I built this bank's security system." And then, everything stopped. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The rain came down hard that Tuesday morning, painting the Seattle skyline in streaks of gray and silver. Droplets slid off the side of Derek Cole's delivery van as he parked outside the towering glass building of Drexler Innovations, a monolith of steel and ambition that housed some of the brightest minds in robotics. Derek adjusted the hood of his navy jacket, grabbed the reinforced box marked Urgent Tech Components, and stepped into the storm. Inside the lobby, the air buzzed with tension. Not the kind of typical corporate anxiety he'd grown used to while delivering to startup campuses or fintech towers. No, this was panic, the kind that clung to the walls like static electricity, about to erupt into sparks. Glass doors swished open as he entered, and immediately he heard it. $4.6 million. Every hour. We're bleeding money, for God's sake. The voice echoed from deeper inside the building. Derek looked toward the security desk, expecting to hand off the delivery, as usual, but the guard was distracted. Eyes locked on something happening upstairs. "You here for a drop-off?" the man asked distractedly. "Yeah," Derek said quietly, holding up the package. "Take it straight to the 4th floor. They said don't delay it. Elevator's on the left." Derek blinked. Normally he never went past the front desk. Policy, liability, race, all of it. But today the rules seemed to be bending under pressure. The elevator hummed upward, and as the doors opened, Derek stepped into a war zone of wires, whiteboards, and whispered curses. Engineers in hoodies and blazers clustered around a central platform. On it stood a humanoid robot, sleek, futuristic, and very, very still. Monitors flickered with error codes. Diagrams were scratched out and redrawn. No one noticed the delivery guy with the package. "I told you the haptic motor was misaligned," snapped a woman with glasses and a tense jawline.
"No, it's the firmware loop. The override's killing the subroutine,"
another voice shouted. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. Firmware feedback loop? A tall man with gelled blonde hair and an expensive-looking vest spun around. "Just scrap the launch, okay? We're going to get roasted in the press." There was a heavy silence. Then someone shouted, "Where's the new actuator driver? It was supposed to be delivered today." Derek cleared his throat. Yeah, that's me." He held up the box. Every eye turned to him for a moment, not with gratitude, but irritation, as if he'd walked into a private tragedy wearing muddy boots. "Leave it there," snapped the blonde man. Derek moved to set it down, but his eyes couldn't help drifting toward the screen. His mind, built like a silent machine itself, began processing like it always did. Feedback loop. Loop on what? He looked at the stream of code racing by, blinking red. He saw the repeating integers, the escalating variable stack, an infinite return on a flawed condition. He blinked. Then, under his breath, he murmured, "It's a firmware feedback loop issue." The room went still. "What did you say?" someone asked. Derek looked up, surprised he'd spoken aloud. Excuse me, what do you know about our firmware?" the blonde man asked. His voice was sharp now. "Defense?" "Nothing," Derek said. "Just the recursive pattern on the loop variable. You were stacking it without a terminate clause. So it crashes." The blonde man stepped forward, arms crossed. "Then you do it, genius." His name was Tyler Vex, the room's clear alpha. Ivy League smirk, exuding entitlement, like it was cologne. Derek hesitated. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't wearing a badge. Hell, he wasn't even white. The air got thick, like it always did when he crossed an invisible line. "Security," Tyler barked. "Get this guy out of here." Two guards who'd been standing near the back moved forward, tense and ready. But before they could reach him, a voice sliced through the room. "Wait!" Everyone turned. A woman with short silver hair and an obsidian power suit stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, they were locked on Derek like he was a puzzle she hadn't yet solved. "Natalie Drexler, CEO." She didn't speak for a beat. Then, calmly, she said, "Let's see what he's talking about." Tyler's mouth dropped slightly. "You can't be serious." "He didn't touch anything. He just looked and saw something you didn't," Natalie replied. without turning her gaze away from Derek. That's worth 5 minutes of silence. Murmurs flitted across the room. Some laughed. Others just stared. Derek could feel his heart thudding in his chest. Not out of fear, but from the sharp edge of injustice. He could see it in Tyler's eyes, in the way the others stood too far from him, as if brilliance could only come in a lab coat or a LinkedIn profile. But then again, he had always been different. He remembered being 12 and building his first circuit board from scraps he found behind a recycling bin. At 16, he rewrote the code for a defective vending machine at school, just by watching its blinking error message. And at Caltech, before everything went wrong, his professors used to whisper that he was the kind of kid who saw electricity the way composers saw symphonies. He swallowed, glanced at the prototype, then at the guards.
No one moved.
The screwdriver sat next to the console. He stepped forward slowly. Each footfall sounded like a decision. He reached for the tool. One last glance at the crowd. And then, he picked it up. The screwdriver clicked against the first bolt, and every engineer leaned in, not to help, but to watch him fail. The screwdriver clicked against the casing, with a soft metallic tap. Derek's hands, steady and precise, moved like he'd handled this prototype 1,000 times. Except he hadn't. Not this exact one. But the architecture was familiar. He recognized the patterns, the gaps in logic, the lazy shortcuts disguised as innovation. And beneath the sleek shell of Drexler's flagship robot, he saw something else, arrogance disguised as engineering. A breath held the room hostage as he unscrewed the first panel. Tyler folded his arms and leaned against a desk, whispering to the man beside him, "Let's see how long before he electrocutes himself." A few others chuckled under their breath. Someone muttered, "Should have brought popcorn." But Derek tuned them out. Their voices had long since become background noise in his life. He could feel the tension in the circuits before even touching them, like static in the air. His fingers brushed over the insulated connectors, and within seconds he found the issue. A return loop without a proper failsafe. A recursive call stack designed to optimize but only on paper. In reality, it doubled back on itself endlessly, a software Ouroboros swallowing its own logic. It wasn't just an error. It was a signature mistake. Textbook academic laziness. He knew the kind well. He adjusted the micro ribbon connector with a pressure clip, bypassed the feedback loop using a debug override, and patched it through a simplified signal repeater of his own design. An instinctive workaround. A bead of sweat formed on Tyler's temple. Who taught him to do that? A junior engineer whispered. Derek's face didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on the circuits, his breathing steady, his movements deliberate. Every inch of him screamed control. Flashback. 8 years ago. A cramped dorm room. At Caltech. 23-year-old Derek stood over a busted university drone. Its blades shattered. Its core board fried from a shorted voltage overload. Professors said it was beyond salvage. Derek had it hovering within 6 hours. His name started traveling between labs. The coal kid. They called him. Gifted. Tireless. Obsessive. The kind of brain people didn't understand. So they tried to use. Until the accusation. Until someone from the dean's office barged into his room with campus security, waving a forged IP address that allegedly traced a security breach to his computer. Files deleted. A project sabotaged. No hearing. No trial. Just questions he wasn't allowed to answer. They revoked his scholarship. His dream. His future. No one cared that he was never caught with stolen files. Only that a black kid had somehow gotten too close to something proprietary. Back in the present, Derek blinked the memory away, tightened a data port, and tapped the circuit node twice. The robot's chest flickered, and the eyes flashed blue, first dim, then steady. Slowly, the body straightened on its hydraulic platform. A single tone echoed from its internal speakers. System operational. Gasps shot across the room like shrapnel. What the? Is it actually running? No way. That's not possible. One of the engineers scrambled to his console, scanning the diagnostics in disbelief. It's cleared all error states. The loop's gone. Tyler's jaw twitched. Derek stood back, brushing his hands together softly. Not to gloat. Not even to acknowledge the room. Just to close the chapter on another broken system he never designed, but knew how to fix. Explain what you did. Someone demanded. I'd bypassed the recursion, Derek said, his tone measured. It wasn't scaling properly, because the firmware's variable scope was too shallow. I used the debug layer to hard-code an interrupt signal and gave the feedback loop a float limiter to cap out at 10 iterations. Tyler scoffed, stepping forward. That's ridiculous. That's my architecture. He just read my debug logs and copied them. Derek turned to him. You didn't have a debug log. You had a panic script rerouting errors back into the mainframe. That's not architecture. That's duct tape. Silence again. Then one of the junior developers muttered. He's right. Tyler's face flushed. Security, he snapped. I want this man removed. Now. He had no authorization to touch company property. The guards who had hovered awkwardly by the door started moving forward again. Derek didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there surrounded by evidence of his brilliance, his calm, his clarity, and watched the men who were paid to protect the status quo prepare to shove him out like a trespasser. But before they reached him, the sharp clack of heels echoed across the floor. Natalie Drexler stepped into the path of the guards, her voice crisp and cold as mountain air. Not so fast. Everyone froze. I don't care about protocol, she continued. I care about results. And what I just witnessed was a masterclass in applied logic. That device is operational. Because of him. So unless you want your names on the next shareholder lawsuit, I suggest you take your hands off my guest. The guards stopped mid-step. Derek's breath caught, but he didn't let it show. Tyler fumed, his voice rising with a panicked edge. You can't be serious. He's not cleared, he's not vetted, he just touched $1 billion prototype. And you, Natalie shot back without blinking, had 16 months and a team of 15 to make it walk. He did it in 10 minutes with a screwdriver. The engineers looked around, stunned. The power dynamic shifted in real time. Natalie turned to Derek. Name? Derek Cole. Derek, do you have time to explain what you just did to my engineering team? He glanced around at the sea of suspicious eyes. That depends. Am I about to be arrested? No, she said, walking past Tyler like he was furniture. You're about to be heard. Tyler's face twisted into something ugly, panic buried in pride. But as Natalie led Derek toward the side conference room, murmurs followed them. Not just surprise, but curiosity, and jealousy, and fear. Because something had just cracked open. Natalie Drexler stared through the glass wall of the conference room, her reflection a sharp contrast to the chaos unfolding behind her. Engineers still buzzed around the now functioning prototype, some in disbelief, others too proud to admit what had just happened. And in the center of that storm, calm and unmoved, stood Derek Cole, his hands at his sides, his face unreadable, and his eyes scanning everything. She turned back to him slowly. Who are you? Derek shifted his weight, but his voice was even. Delivery guy. I used to study circuits. Natalie narrowed her eyes, waiting for more. He didn't offer it. Where did you study? She asked, inching closer to the truth. Caltech, Derek replied. Didn't finish. That made her pause. This is insane, Tyler barked. He shouldn't even be in this building. We have proprietary systems exposed. How do you know he didn't plant something? Natalie raised a brow. Plant what? Exactly. Malware. A bypass exploit. Hell, a keylogger. Tyler threw his hands up. You said it yourself. He wasn't supposed to touch anything. And now suddenly he's the hero. Derek didn't react. He sat calmly across the table, eyes on Tyler like he'd seen this performance before. I think you wanted to make us look incompetent, Tyler spat, and congratulations, you did. There was silence. Derek's jaw flexed once, but he stayed silent. Natalie turned to Tyler. We have internal surveillance on all systems. If he planted anything, we'll find it. Not if he's smart enough to hide it. Derek leaned forward slightly. You think I hid malware while 6 engineers watched me in real time? Or maybe I just understood something you didn't. Natalie stepped between them. That's enough. But the tension didn't dissipate. It coiled tighter. Flashback, 4 years earlier. A different company. A different failure. Tyler Vex standing at a podium, taking credit for an AI optimization protocol he barely understood. The interns who had coded most of it were nowhere in sight. Later that year, when the system glitched and cost the company its biggest contract, Tyler pointed the blame downward, at an Indian intern named Raj. He was let go within a week. Tyler's name remained untouched. He'd been doing it for years. His genius wasn't engineering. It was staying just behind the fallout, always with clean hands. Present. Natalie left the conference room and made her way to the control center. She signaled the lead security officer to pull the system logs and surveillance footage from the last 2 hours. As the video played, she watched Derek's every move. No USBs. No unauthorized access. No tampering. Just eyes, hands, and a brain that worked faster than most people could blink. She zoomed in on his face as he leaned over the circuit board, hands moving with absolute confidence. There was no malice, no rush, just clarity. Purpose. Natalie returned to the conference room. He didn't plant anything, she said, coolly. Tyler shook his head. You're making a mistake. We don't know anything about him. And that's what makes this moment fascinating. She replied. She turned to Derek. You saw the flaw before we even knew what was wrong. That's not an accident. No, Derek said. It's experience. She folded her arms. Why'd you leave Caltech? Derek hesitated. Not because he was hiding, but because he was calculating whether the truth was worth it. I was accused of breaching the research firewall. He said finally. No evidence. No hearing. They just said my IP matched a breach and pulled my scholarship. Said I was too comfortable with gray areas. Were you guilty? Natalie asked. No, Derek answered, eyes steady. But it didn't matter. Natalie nodded once, something behind her eyes flickering recognition, maybe, or guilt. Outside the glass wall, the social dynamic had already begun to shift. Engineers whispered among themselves. Uneasy, a few interns huddled by the coffee station, sneaking glances through the glass. He's smarter than all of them, one whispered. Jaleesa heard it and smiled. Quietly, then quickly buried it. It wasn't safe to smile like that here. But her heart beat faster. Someone like her had just done what none of them could. And not by climbing the ladder, they'd kick down the door. Inside, Natalie paced. Explain to me exactly what you saw. From the beginning. Derek nodded, stood and walked to the whiteboard. He picked up a marker and began drawing loops, subroutines, and feedback signals. He explained the firmware crash, the recursion pattern, and how Tyler's attempt to fix the override had only buried the flaw deeper. As he spoke, Natalie's engineers, drawn by the technical language, began filtering in, one by one, quietly surrounding the glass room, listening. Tyler stood at the back, arms crossed, watching his credibility dissolve. And you saw this just standing there?
Natalie asked.
Derek nodded. You can hear recursion when you've lived around it long enough. People loop, systems loop. So do failures. The room was silent. Finally, Natalie exhaled slowly. You're not a delivery guy. Derek gave her a tired smile. I am. Just not the kind you're used to. She looked at him carefully, balancing risk against reward. Then she said the words that flipped the room upside down. Stay. For 1 week. Consult. Help us get this prototype stable before launch. Murmurs rippled outside the glass. Tyler stepped forward. You're offering him a job? I'm offering him an opportunity, she said flatly. Derek's expression didn't change. But Natalie wasn't done. On one condition, she added. You can stay, but you'll be reporting directly to Tyler. The silence in the conference room was icy. Natalie's words still hung in the air like a dare. You'll report directly to Tyler. Derek studied her for a long moment. There was no malice in her voice, but there was calculation. She was testing him, seeing if he'd flinch at being placed under the very man who'd tried to discredit him. Power rarely shifted cleanly, especially in corporate America, and Natalie Drexler wasn't offering charity. She was offering a spotlight, a short one, under heat. Let me get this straight, Derek said slowly. You want me to fix a system your team can't stabilize, work under the guy who tried to have me thrown out, and what? Hope no one pulls the same stunt twice? Her expression remained unreadable. You're not here for validation, Derek. You're here to prove them wrong. He glanced through the glass at Tyler, who was pacing like a man just told he had to babysit a grenade. Then, for the first time since he stepped into the building, Derek smiled, but it was tired, worn, the kind of smile that knew how this played out. Why now? He asked, voice lowering. Because your prototype failed publicly, or because the delivery guy happened to fix it while your best minds stood around blaming each other. Natalie didn't blink. Because this company doesn't survive another launch failure, and I'd rather gamble on the one person who saw the problem than 10 who didn't. Derek looked down at the table, then up at Jaleesa, still watching from just outside the room, pretending not to. He sighed. 1 week, he said, but I work under my own conditions. Natalie raised an eyebrow. Such as, I want full access to internal schematics, real-time logs, and component history, he replied. And I speak to your interns directly, unfiltered. Tyler, who had just walked back in, scoffed audibly. This is insane. You had your chance, Derek said without looking at him. Now I'll take mine. Natalie considered the demands. You'll have access under a security proxy. Interns are yours. Then we have a deal. The next morning, Derek walked into Drexler Innovations, not as a delivery man, but as a consultant. No badge, no desk, just a visitor lanyard, and a rapidly growing reputation. Whispers followed him down the halls. Some more curious, others resentful. More than a few were plainly hostile. Tyler met him at the elevator with a grimace. You've got 3 days, not 7, he said, stepping aside with a smirk. And if you so much as sneeze wrong, you're out. Then bless me, Derek muttered as the doors closed. By noon, he was already rewriting the playbook. Inside the engineering suite, he pulled up the system architecture on a shared wall screen. Eyes rolled, arms crossed. But then the revision started. Signal choke on the sensor loop, he said aloud. You're using heat-insulated wiring across a voltage rail that caps too early. That's why the left arm stalls. Blank stares. And the tracking algorithm you were so proud of? It's reactive, not predictive. The delay's 0.6 seconds. That's an eternity in robotics. Tyler bristled. Those were cleared by our QA team. Then your QA team needs glasses. Derek shot back. By hour 3, he'd flagged 14 design flaws, corrected 6 on the spot, and left half the room questioning how he'd spotted problems they'd been blind to for months. Word spread. Interns peeked in, then stayed. Jaleesa took quiet notes from the back row, barely blinking. A few mid-level engineers began shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, forced to choose between loyalty to the hierarchy and awe at Derek's mind. But success didn't make space for him. Not really. At lunchtime, he returned to his workstation to find the screen locked, even though he'd never set a password. A yellow sticky note had been slapped to his chair. It read, "Go back to FedEx. We build things here." Another note found its way to his water bottle. "Stealing ideas won't get you tenure, delivery boy." Derek stared at it for a long moment, then peeled it off and dropped it in the trash. He didn't tell Natalie. He didn't confront anyone. There was no point. They wanted him off balance, distracted. He'd lived this pattern before. Instead, he turned back to the schematics. Let the code answer them. That evening, Jaleesa approached him quietly. "You good?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. "Define good," he said dryly. She smirked. "You rattled them. They thought you'd either collapse or scream. I've done both," he said. "In another life. Didn't work." She glanced around. "They think you're temporary. A PR stunt. Then let's make it permanent," Derek replied. Later that night, after most had gone home, Derek stayed late. The lab was dim, save for the glow of monitors. He'd asked for logs from the last 3 months, complete system behavior reports. Something wasn't adding up. The prototype hadn't just failed, due to poor design. There was inconsistency in the voltage readings, intermittent drain, random reboot flags. No one had mentioned it. Derek followed the trail. Line by line, he scanned the internal access logs. Then, deep inside the boot log, he found it. Code that shouldn't have been there. A hidden process, cloaked with a false label. Its function was clear. Background listening, data export, system override permissions, spyware. It hadn't triggered alerts because it was written to blend obfuscated beneath driver operations. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, and it wasn't part of the Drexler build. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the line of code pulsing at the bottom of the screen. This wasn't an accident. It was planted. As Derek traced the origin signature, a name popped up on the access log metadata, and it wasn't Tyler's. It was someone higher. Someone from inside the executive team. The blinking cursor stared back at Derek like a ticking bomb. In the dim glow of the lab's after-hours silence, he scrolled through the final thread of metadata that confirmed what his instincts had already told him. This wasn't a simple design flaw. This wasn't a rookie mistake. The spyware embedded inside Drexler's robotics mainframe had no competitor callouts, no exfiltrated IP addresses, no signs of outside intrusion. It wasn't built to steal. It was built to crash. More precisely, to crash during launch. Derek leaned in, studying the looped logic functions buried under innocent driver scripts. The code was scheduled to trigger at a very specific runtime interval, 2.4 hours post-activation. That would place the failure about 20 minutes into a live demonstration, just long enough to impress an audience before collapsing in front of the press. This was sabotage, and it wasn't for theft. It was for spectacle. His pulse thudded. Someone wanted the robot to fail publicly, to ruin Drexler's credibility, tank the prototype, and maybe drag down the woman at the top of it all. But the question wasn't just who wrote the code, it was who stood to benefit. Derek launched the internal debugger and unlocked a hidden access panel he'd seen referenced only once. An undocumented protocol tucked deep inside the root admin scripts. Most engineers would have missed it, mistaking it for a legacy dev tool, but Derek knew backdoors when he saw them. In Caltech's darkest months, he'd spent weeks dissecting code used to frame him, looking for the fingerprints buried in lines and loops. He used the tool to trace the script's creation metadata. It had been generated internally, timestamped 3 months ago. The access ID attached. TVX, Tyler. Derek's mouth tightened. He stood slowly, heart thudding. Everything made sense now. The panicked overreaction when he fixed the prototype, the wild accusations, the constant power plays. Tyler hadn't just been embarrassed by Derek's intervention. He'd been exposed too soon. The failure wasn't premature. Derek had ruined the schedule. But still, something didn't add up. Tyler might have created the code, but someone had approved its deployment. And Derek knew Tyler well enough now to know he wasn't smart enough to hide it this cleanly. He needed a second mind. He needed Jaleesa. The next morning, Derek waited until the engineering suite cleared out, then approached her at the server station. Her hair was tied back, eyes fixed on a network panel. But she caught his reflection in the monitor and didn't flinch. "Got a second?" he asked softly. She turned. "You look like you found a ghost." "I think I found a grenade." They moved into an empty break room. He pulled up the data on his tablet, walked her through it, line by line. Jaleesa's eyes widened as she took it in. "Wait," she said slowly. "That code, it's not just meant to crash the bot. If it activates mid-demo, it'll reboot the limbs during a feedback calibration. It could knock someone out. Or worse," Derek added. "Which means this isn't just sabotage. It's malicious. Corporate homicide. If something goes wrong." Jaleesa looked pale. "We have to go to Natalie." "Not yet. If we show this now, it looks like speculation. Tyler will spin it, say I planted the code myself, flip it into a narrative about the volatile new hire. Then what?" Derek leaned forward. "We bait it out. I'll build a honeypot, mirror the code into a test unit, and track who accesses it. If Tyler or anyone else tries to scrub it, I'll have proof." Jaleesa hesitated. "And if they don't take the bait?" "Then we leak it. Quietly, but cleanly." Across the building, the pressure cooker was whistling. Natalie Drexler sat in her office, staring at a wall of messages from shareholders and board members. Screens lit up with alerts. Concerns over rogue consultant, risk management flags, legal exposure if proprietary data breached. One particularly venomous memo read, "He wasn't vetted. He isn't certified. Why is a delivery man running our product diagnostics?" Another bluntly demanded, "Fire Cole." Today, Natalie stood at the window, arms folded. Her reflection in the glass didn't waver, but her footing did. Her empire was brittle. Every gamble she made cracked a different piece of the foundation. But beneath the pressure was a quieter truth. Derek had done more in 2 days than her entire team in 3 months. She buzzed Derek's line. He answered in a clipped tone. "Yeah, you've got people circling," she said quietly. "I'm holding them back. But not forever." He paused. Noted. "Derek." "Yeah?" She hesitated. "Be careful. They're looking for a reason to paint you as dangerous." A silence stretched. Derek thought back to Caltech, where dangerous had meant black and brilliant, and unprotected. He remembered the moment he was dragged into the dean's office, accused of digital intrusion he couldn't prove he hadn't committed. No one believed the kid from South LA, with a perfect GPA, not when the accused file held a multi-million-dollar research grant. He hadn't been suspended. He'd been erased. Derek hung up without another word. That evening, the parking garage was darker than usual. A motion sensor failed to trigger. As Derek stepped toward his car, the echo of his footsteps the only sound. He unlocked the door, tossed his bag inside, and froze. A figure stepped from the shadows. Tyler, jacket loose, tie undone, eyes sharp and burning. "I know what you're doing," he said, voice low. Derek didn't move. "You'll have to narrow it down." You're digging where you shouldn't. Looking for things that don't concern you. Crashing robots in front of investors does concern me. Tyler stepped closer. You don't belong here. You never did. Derek locked eyes with him. That's what they told me at Caltech. That's what they said when they took everything I'd worked for. This time, I'm staying. Tyler smiled. But it wasn't smug. It was nervous. Then he whispered, You think I'm the problem? Derek's brow furrowed. You're not even close, Tyler said. He turned, walked away, and muttered, Just loud enough. You should ask her why the code exists at all. The parking garage was silent, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights flickering above. Derek stood still, his pulse steady despite Tyler's looming presence. He had been cornered before in classrooms, offices, job interviews, but this time was different. This wasn't just another white man with too much authority and too little accountability. This was fear masked in arrogance. Tyler's smirk curled like smoke. You think you're some kind of savior? Some tech messiah come to expose our sins? Derek didn't flinch. You're a charity case. You got into Caltech because of a scholarship designed to make the brochure look good. You were never supposed to be in our world. And you sure as hell weren't supposed to survive in it. Derek's hands stayed at his sides, but his voice was cold steel. You're scared because I exposed your weakness. And it wasn't just bad code. Tyler stepped closer, a bitter laugh escaping. You think you've won? You fixed one problem. You exposed me. Big deal. You're still alone here. They'll never accept you. You'll always be temporary. Derek tilted his head slightly. You mean like you? Outsourced vision. Inflated title. Daddy's board connections. You're not a builder, Tyler. You're a resume in loafers. For a flicker, Tyler's mask slipped. But instead of escalating, he backed away, hands up in mock surrender. You'll regret ever stepping in here, he said with a bitter smile. They always do. Then he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Derek alone beneath the hum of cold lights and older ghosts. The next morning, Drexler Innovations looked polished and unaware, like nothing rotten could exist beneath the pristine glass. But whispers followed Derek wherever he walked. Some engineers gave him clipped nods, others avoided eye contact entirely. Still, he kept his focus. Natalie had reluctantly agreed to let him address the interns, something Tyler had tried to block twice through HR, but failed. At noon, the conference room was filled with young, eager faces. Shalisa sat in the front row, eyes steady, a quiet shield in a hostile world. Derek stood in front of them, not with slides or stats but with stories. He didn't talk about sabotage or office politics. He talked about failure. I've been labeled a liability more times than I can count, he began, not because I broke systems, but because I understood them better than the people who built them. The interns leaned in. I've been told to stay in my lane, that I didn't look like leadership, that my background didn't fit the branding of success. But the truth is, systems don't fail because they break. They fail because people protect power more than progress. Jalisa smiled, just a little. Around her, heads nodded slowly. Something electric filled the room. Your ideas won't always be welcomed, Derek continued, especially if they threaten comfort. But that doesn't mean they're wrong. It means they're real. And real ideas make people nervous. The applause was quiet at first, then louder. Not performative, not polite, earned. Later that night, Derek walked back to his car in the now too familiar parking garage. This time, the tension followed him in. He spotted it before he reached the door. Long, jagged scratches running across the driver's side. His breath caught. On the windshield, a folded piece of paper was held down by the wiper. He opened it. Stay in your lane. No signature, no fingerprints, just the same old warning, dressed in a new uniform. He stood there for a long moment. Then, without a word, pulled out his phone and took photos. Not for HR, not for Natalie, for the file he was building. Because this wasn't an isolated threat anymore. It was a pattern. And Derek had learned to catalog every slight, every scratch, every word meant to cut. The next morning, he dropped the photos on Natalie's desk. She looked up, then back down, brow furrowed. Whoever did this has access to your private garage levels, she muttered. That narrows it. You need tighter security, Derek said calmly. You need a bodyguard, she replied, only half joking. He paused. Or a firewall. She met his eyes. I'll increase surveillance. I'll make it clear to the team that harassment will get them terminated. But will it get them replaced? He asked. She didn't answer. Derek turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You should also check your executive access logs," he said. "Some of them are writing more than emails." She stared after him, confused, but concerned. That night, long after the office cleared, Derek sat in the temporary lab, coding quietly, refining the honeypot script he'd set up 2 days earlier. It was clean, elegant, disguised as a beta patch to the old firmware, but embedded with tripwire tracking. Suddenly a ping. Email. Not internal. Not company issued. Anonymous sender. @protonmail.com. Subject. Your boy Vex. Body. Check recent API access logs. He's been calling external ports. Cross-check with Pathron Robotics. Derek's spine straightened. Pathron Robotics. Drexler's rival. The company rumored to be planning a hostile product launch 1 month ahead of Drexler's schedule. He immediately dove into the API logs. And there it was. Remote connection calls routed through a private proxy. Twice last week. Both by Tyler's account. Unusual file sizes. No encrypted headers. Raw design files. Blueprints. Code. He exhaled slowly, trying to quiet the storm building inside his chest. Tyler hadn't just embedded crashware. He'd been feeding Drexler's proprietary code to their competition. But as Derek clicked deeper into the proxy trace, the access authorization didn't just show Tyler's credentials. It also showed a second signature, nested in approval, one tied directly to Natalie Drexler's executive override key. The screen glowed softly in the darkened lab as Derek sat alone, cross-referencing access logs against Tyler's badge scans. Each keystroke peeled back another layer of the sabotage web, time-stamped anomalies, backdoor port calls, unauthorized data packets rerouted through proxy tunnels. The deeper he dug, the more precise the picture became. Every trace led back to one ID. But that wasn't all. Using Drexler's internal project tracker and building entry logs, Derek reconstructed a timeline, spanning 92 days of irregular behaviors. Late-night logins, firmware rollbacks, labeled routine, gaps in the code audit trail timed precisely with external calls to servers linked to Pathron Robotics. And each time a change was made, one detail stood out like a crack in a foundation. Tyler's badge had been used to enter the secure server room, sometimes less than 5 minutes before the firmware edits were logged. It wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was deliberate espionage. At 8:03 a.m., the next morning, Derek requested a private meeting with Natalie. He entered her office without hesitation, tablet in hand, shoulders square. She looked up, tired. "Please tell me this is not another emergency." He placed the tablet on her desk and slid it toward her. "It's a map. Every time your robot failed, Tyler was in the system, within hours, sometimes minutes. And he wasn't just crashing code. He was exporting entire logic branches through proxies to Pathron." Natalie's brows knitted. "Are you sure?" "Logs are clean. Backdoors tracked. All linked to his ID. But here's the part I need you to see. He wasn't working alone." He tapped the screen. Her executive override key flashed in the access tree. She froze. "I'm not accusing you," Derek said calmly. "But someone used your clearance to approve 2 data pushes. Either your credentials were stolen, or someone with access to your executive key authorized them without you." She sat back slowly, her face suddenly pale. "Only my assistant and Tyler's team had network-level clearance to touch my keychain." "Then you've got a mole. Higher than you thought." Silence stretched. Finally, she muttered, "You know what firing him would mean." "I know he's connected," Derek replied. "And I know letting this slide sends a message to every black intern in this building, that the rules bend for power, but break for them." She closed her eyes. Tyler's uncle, Charles Vex, sat on Drexler's board. He controlled a third of investor capital and had the political weight to sink her leadership with one phone call. Firing Tyler would ignite a war, but keeping him, that might end everything. Meanwhile, in the lab, the interns had begun whispering among themselves. The rumors of sabotage, Derek's discoveries, the late-night meetings, it had become too loud to ignore. Angelisa? She heard every word. She watched Tyler closely now. Every eye twitch, every too casual smirk. That afternoon, Derek pulled the interns aside in the secondary testing suite. Far from the executive eyes, he didn't sugarcoat anything. Someone in this building tried to engineer failure. Not just for the prototype, for this entire launch, for the company. If that sounds impossible, good. That means you still believe in decency. They listened, frozen. He pointed to the second prototype on the table. We're rebuilding from scratch. This time, clean, transparent. You'll work in teams of 3. Full access. We write everything. No hidden edits. If someone touches the code without logging it, we pull the power. It was a revolution in miniature. And they loved it. Jalisa, filming quietly from the side, caught a moment that would ripple far beyond those walls. Derek leaned over the new board, wires clamped to his fingers, and said every system that's failed me had one thing in common: someone protecting comfort over clarity. Let's build something uncomfortable. Let's build truth. She posted the clip on her private tech blog. Within 5 hours, it had over 3 million views. Comments exploded. This man needs to lead, not consult. How is the delivery guy the only one fixing billion-dollar mistakes? Expose the sabotage. We see what's happening here. The Drexler PR team scrambled. Natalie's inbox was crushed with media requests. Shareholders started asking questions. And then, a letter arrived, hand-delivered, on embossed stationery, from Vex and Thorn Legal Group. It accused Derek of unauthorized system access, illegal code tampering, defamation, and worst of all, corporate espionage. Filed under the name of Charles Vex, Tyler's uncle. And it bore the signature of a co-signer, David Thorne, another board member with ties to Pathron Robotics. Natalie called Derek into her office, the letter trembling slightly in her fingers. They've made it official, she said. They're calling for your suspension pending investigation. Derek took the letter, read it calmly. They're scared. They're building a legal wall to protect their mole, Natalie said. No, Derek corrected. They're building a story, and they need me to be the villain. Her voice cracked. If I ignore the letter, they'll start removing me next. If I act on it, I validate the lie. He nodded slowly. Then we burn the script. How? Proof. Not just logs. A confession. A breach. Something undeniable. She hesitated. That could take weeks. I have days. That night, a digital alert flashed on Derek's honeypot. Firewall. Someone inside the company had just tried to delete the sabotage script, and the IP address came from inside Natalie's private office. It didn't take long for the storm to hit. By morning, every tech blog, business outlet, and corporate whisper network was running a version of the same headline. Rogue hacker embedded at Drexler Innovations, former Caltech student under investigation for sabotage. Photos of Derek's face, clipped from internal footage, and linked to a decade-old university ID, spread like wildfire. The articles resurrected his past, selectively. They cited the firewall breach from Caltech, the quiet expulsion, the forfeited scholarship. Omitted were the lack of charges, the silence from the university's administration, the professor who vouched for him too late. The headlines didn't say wrongfully accused. They said controversial. They said risky hire. They said potential internal threat. The worst of them? Genius or time bomb. In the Drexler office, the mood curdled. Conversations halted when Derek entered a room. Shared workspaces emptied the second he pulled up a chair. Engineers who'd once asked for his input now refused to even look at him. The unspoken accusation hung like smog. Maybe he did sabotage something. Maybe he was always playing the long game. Natalie summoned him to her office. That afternoon, she didn't meet his eyes. They've sent a second notice, she said. A suspension order, effective immediately. Derek stood still, jaw clenched. Do you believe it? I believe what I've seen with my own eyes, she replied. But I also have to protect the company. They've sent internal auditors. They'll be combing through everything. He nodded once. Then let them. But don't expect the truth to surface just because they're wearing suits. I don't, she said softly. That's the problem. Jalisa, watching from down the hall, saw Derek walk out of the office, without a word. She caught up to him in the elevator. Don't say it, he muttered. I wasn't going to, he exhaled. They've made up their minds. I'm not a liability, I'm a symbol. And symbols get sacrificed. Not all of them, she said, her voice quiet. Some breakthrough. He didn't answer, but Jalisa had already set a plan in motion. 2 hours later, a private meeting convened in a conference room, hidden in the research wing. Jalisa had arranged it quietly. Off calendar, no Drexler logos, no assistants, just 4 chairs, 1 round table, and a plain manila folder placed at the center. Inside sat Natalie, arms crossed. Across from her Derek. Next to Jaleesa, an older black man with graying temples and a quiet sadness in his eyes. Professor Lionel Bryce. He had been one of the lead engineering faculty at Caltech during Derek's time there. A man once known for pioneering open-source robotics before the school steered him into administrative silence. "Thank you for coming," Jaleesa said. Bryce looked across the table at Derek, the shame already etched in his face. "I should have come sooner," he said. Derek stared at him. "You watched it happen." "I did," Bryce replied, "and I let fear speak louder than truth." Natalie narrowed her eyes. "You were his professor?" Bryce nodded. "He was the best student I'd ever seen, not just intelligent visionary. He didn't just solve problems. He saw how problems began." "Then why didn't you speak out when he was accused?" Bryce opened the manila folder and slid it across the table. Inside were pages of internal Caltech memos, emails, security reports, all redacted, then unsealed under California's Academic Transparency Act. "I tried," he said, "but the administration decided Derek was expendable. Easier to erase a student than confront the truth about who actually accessed the servers." Derek flipped through the pages. His own name appeared in 5 memos. None had been shared with him. "You were right," Bryce said. "All along." Natalie's gaze shifted. "Why now?" "Because your intern tracked me down. Because public opinion's shifting. Because it's too late to fix the past, but not too late to tell it." Outside, social media had already begun to shift. Jaleesa had leaked a short clip of Professor Bryce's recorded statement. It climbed to 1 million views in under 2 hours. Comment sections filled with outrage, support, apologies from strangers, calls for Caltech accountability. The narrative began to tilt. That evening, Natalie reinstated Derek, quietly at first, then publicly. A press statement was issued. "Derek Cole has been cleared of all internal wrongdoing and is continuing his vital work on our robotic system. Drexler Innovations supports talent that challenges boundaries." But beneath the PR polish, Natalie's mind churned. Because if Tyler wasn't the only one touching her executive clearance, someone far closer had breached it. Someone with access to her biometric key. She tightened internal firewalls, quietly launched an in-house audit, cut off executive-level code access to everyone but herself and one other senior developer, and she kept Derek close. Not out of protection, but because she no longer trusted her own circle. 3 days later, just after midnight, Derek sat alone in Lab B, with the nearly finished prototype, the stripped-down test version. His team had rebuilt from scratch. Everything had been manually verified. Clean code, clean component. Or so he thought. As part of a final safety protocol, Derek ran a diagnostic test on the machine's failsafe system, the emergency override that should have stopped all movement if the robot detected physical contact or signal conflict. But the code didn't respond. He frowned, ran it again, still nothing. Then he dug deeper, into the sublayer drivers, buried beneath the failsafe patch, and there it was, a dead override call. If the robot encountered a conflict during activation, it wouldn't stop. It would accelerate. A forced reroute. Subroutine had been planted inside the limb movement script. If triggered, it would bypass manual commands entirely, causing the robot to override all collision detection and execute its last motion at full speed. A shoulder swing. A hand extension. A torque twist. At scale, it could kill someone. Derek's mouth went dry. This wasn't sabotage for embarrassment anymore. It was premeditated harm. And this version of the robot was set to demo in 4 days. Live. He yanked out his phone, preparing to call Natalie. But then paused. Because the modification? It was buried in the new code base. The one only the clean team had access to. Only 6 people had clearance. And one of them was Jaleesa. As Derek stared at the terminal, a second hidden file decrypted on its own. An automatic timer revealing a name buried inside the override script. Cole Backup Patch V2. Authored under his own ID. The soft hum of the lab equipment was the only sound as Derek stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the horror hiding behind a string of familiar variables. Cole Backup Patch V2, the override file that would have killed someone, was authored under his own ID, but he hadn't written it. He knew every line of code he had touched since returning to Drexler. He had version control logs, memory, pattern recognition. That file wasn't his. But whoever wrote it had copied his naming convention, mimicked his syntax, and buried it in a subroutine designed to activate during a live demo. It wouldn't trigger in test mode. Only in a high-stress public launch sequence. Only when it was too late. The realization landed hard. Whoever had planted it didn't just want the robot to fail. They wanted blood. Derek took a breath, heart pounding but steady, and activated a full script trace. Whoever forged the code had cloned his ID using admin privileges. They'd masked the digital signature to bounce through a loop of previous logins, creating the illusion that he had built the patch 2 nights ago. The sabotage wasn't clever anymore. It was desperate. Later that morning, Derek confronted the one person he needed to be certain about. Micah Jones, a junior coder who had been quiet throughout the entire rebuild. Micah was soft-spoken, talented, and like Derek, one of the few black engineers in the room. His loyalty had seemed solid, but in a place where silence could be weaponized, Derek wasn't sure of anything anymore. He found Micah in the server room, checking heat signatures. "Micah," Derek said, "I need the truth, now." Micah didn't look up. "About what?" "The override script in the clean build. Someone used my ID to plant it. That file could break a person's spine during a demo." Micah's hands trembled slightly. Derek stepped closer. "If you know something and say nothing, and someone dies because of this..." Micah exhaled. "I didn't write it." "I didn't say you did." "But I know who did." Derek froze. "Who?" Micah turned slowly, eyes wide with guilt. "Tyler. He showed me the early code months ago. Said it was a failsafe to force a recall. He laughed about it. Said if it burned the place down, we'd rebuild richer. That sometimes disruption takes casualties." Derek clenched his jaw. "And you didn't tell anyone?"
I thought he was joking.
Micah's voice cracked. "And then he offered me a job at Pathrun. Said Drexler was just a stepping stone. That the people in charge didn't deserve what they were building." Derek took a step back, fists tight at his sides. "So you stayed quiet?" Micah nodded, ashamed. "You gave him time to weaponize it." Across campus, preparations for the press launch churned forward like a train, without brakes. The stage had been constructed. The prototype was cleaned and positioned under high-intensity lights. Tech journalists from all corners of the industry began arriving, armed with cameras, questions, and expectations. Inside the boardroom, Natalie stood with Jaleesa, her voice tense but even. "I'm delaying this launch," she said. "We can't risk something going wrong." But Jaleesa shook her head, urgently. "You don't have that kind of window. You're on the verge of losing your investor pool. If this doesn't go forward, they'll sell off your patents and fold you into Pathrun. So let them," Natalie snapped. "At least no one dies. But what if we can fix it before it happens?" Natalie narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I trust Derek," Jaleesa said. "Let him rework the firmware. Just him. No one else. He's already under legal threat, and the man who framed him for it is still roaming this building." Natalie looked at her, this intern with no title, no leverage, but absolute clarity in her voice, and nodded once. "Fine. He has until morning." That night, Derek locked himself in Lab B. He didn't go home. He didn't sleep. He rebuilt the entire failsafe system from scratch, rewriting every collision routine, stripping down legacy loops, and embedding a triple-check kill switch hardwired to an external remote in his jacket. The sabotage code he found, he didn't delete it. He quarantined it, sealed in a ghost partition, protected by a trigger that would expose the author's credentials if activated. Let them try, he thought. Let them walk into their own trap. Outside, the city lights blinked like a heartbeat. Inside, Derek worked in silence, saving not just code, but lives. By sunrise, the prototype was ready. The launch space buzzed with activity. A holographic Drexler logo hovered above the stage. Investors in tailored suits sipped espresso and murmured with PR agents. Tyler was nowhere to be found. No texts, no emails, not even a check-in. Natalie stood backstage, nerves steel-bound. Jaleesa paced beside her, dressed in sharp gray, tablet in hand, pretending not to shake. The robot stood center stage, powered down but gleaming. Reporters were handed specs, and a buzz of anticipation rippled through the crowd. Derek stood quietly in the wings, remote kill switch in his pocket, eyes locked on the machine. Micah stood nearby, watching him, lips pressed tight. Natalie approached Derek. "You good?" she asked. He nodded. "Better than they are." "You'll run the demo?" He shook his head. "No. I'll observe." She hesitated. "And if something goes wrong?" Derek's voice was calm. "It won't." But inside his pulse was ticking down. Because no one had seen Tyler. No one knew what he'd planned. And in a building full of systems and cameras, he had somehow vanished. As Natalie stepped on stage to open the launch, a message flashed across Derek's secure tablet. An anonymous alert: Tyler's not gone. Check the live feed, Sector 5 server core. The event floor gleamed under artificial light, every surface polished to reflect prestige. Tech bloggers tweeted live updates. Journalists jostled for the best angles. The Drexler Innovations logo pulsed on the large LED display above the main stage, like a heartbeat. Natalie Drexler stood at the podium, nerves wired, mouth rehearsed. Behind her, the prototype stood tall, sleek, silent, waiting. She cleared her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Today marks a new chapter in human-robotic synergy, a chapter built not just by technology, but by the relentless minds behind it. In the crowd, Jaleesa stood near the control panel, tablet glowing softly in her hands. Micah lingered near the rig, visibly sweating. The interns flanked the robot nervously, silently praying nothing went wrong.
It looked normal.
Tyler's not gone. Check live feed. Sector 5 server core. Derek's stomach dropped. That server housed the AI routing system, the brain of the robot's decision tree. No one had clearance to modify it remotely, unless they'd installed a backdoor. He tapped the feed. The image stuttered, pixelated, then sharpened. Tyler, in a server room surrounded by outdated drives, eyes wild, fingers racing across a terminal. His face was lit with blue light, sweat clinging to his forehead. On screen, Derek saw strings of new command line entries flooding the firmware shell. Shortcuts, overrides, accelerators. The speed was staggering. Tyler was embedding code in real time. On stage, Natalie cued the demo. Meet DIRIS-1, the first Drexler unit capable of complex real-world movement with predictive logic sequencing. The robot's eyes lit blue. Cameras flashed. The crowd applauded. But Derek didn't move. He was still watching the tablet. One of Tyler's inputs caught his eye. A command override for motor acceleration tied to demo sequence trigger. Derek's breath hitched. He looked up just in time to see the robot begin its movement routine. Too fast. The foot motors jerked forward. The stride lengthened unnaturally. The speed wasn't just increased, it was compounded. Instead of walking, the robot surged toward the crowd. Gasps erupted. A cameraman stumbled back. The front row scattered. Natalie froze mid-sentence, her eyes snapping wide. What the hell? The robot's left arm began to rise faster than it should, rotating with unnatural torque. It reached toward a stack of equipment just feet from a tech blogger with a camera around her neck. And then Derek moved. He sprinted forward, cutting through the chaos, people yelling his name, security shouting, Natalie panicking. Derek dove toward the platform and yanked the emergency remote from his pocket, slamming his thumb down on the kill command. A high-pitched whine rang out. The robot froze. Mid-step. Mid-reach. Its servos locked in place. A faint hiss of cooled hydraulics venting into silence. For 3 long seconds, no one breathed. Then the whispers started. Was that part of the demo? Did it glitch? Is that the delivery guy? Reporters surged forward, cameras rolling, questions flying. What just happened? Did that thing almost attack someone? Who authorized the safety override? Jaleesa stepped into the center with a fire in her chest. She raised her tablet and tapped a command. The robot's logs appeared on the display screen behind the stage, code scrolling in real time. At the bottom of the console, a red warning flashed. Unformalized command detected source external terminal, 19.8. Jaleesa looked directly at the media crowd. That command wasn't part of the Drexler demo. A ripple of murmurs spread like fire. Natalie recovered enough to step up to the mic. Our internal team intercepted a malicious input. Thanks to emergency measures, no one was hurt. We'll be conducting a full forensic audit immediately. Derek stood quietly beside the frozen robot, sweat on his forehead, heart pounding. He watched the screen flash with his name. Override executed by D. Cole. Proof of action, but not intention. It was his reputation on display again. And this time, the entire world was watching. And then the screen flickered again. The Drexler logo disappeared, replaced by a live stream window. A man appeared. Tyler, broadcasting from an unknown location. His background was dim, nondescript, but what he wore was unmistakable. A black badge clipped to his chest.
Platform Robotics.
His expression was cold, controlled but burning underneath. To the press watching, I want to make something very clear, he began. I had nothing to do with the sabotage at Drexler. In fact, I warned their leadership months ago about instability in their AI routines, and was punished for it. Lies. Smooth, well-practiced, televised lies. Unfortunately, Tyler continued, a disgruntled consultant named Derek Cole, a man with a history of unethical code manipulation, was allowed full access to the Drexler prototype. Today his actions endangered lives. Gasps. More questions. Flashes. Jaleesa's jaw dropped. Natalie's fists clenched. Tyler leaned forward in the feed. The badge in clear view. I now work for a company that values ethics, structure, and innovation. I hope Drexler's board does the right thing. The stream cut out. Derek stepped off the stage as security scrambled. As reporters shouted over each other. As the world spun. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. They had seen the badge. They had seen the lie. And for the first time everyone understood what he'd been up against. Not just racism or erasure, but an empire of deception with no limit. As Jaleesa gathered her things, her tablet buzzed with an untraceable message. You're next. Tell Cole to run while he still can. By morning Derek's name was everywhere. His face, stoic and steady as he hit the kill switch, had become an icon screen captured, filtered and retweeted across the internet. The headlines that once painted him as a risk had been rewritten in real time by millions of digital voices. Derek Cole saves lives at Drexler Robotics demo. Engineer silenced. Until he saved the company from its own prototype. Lets Derek lead trending as support for black engineer soars. It wasn't just news. It was a movement. Let Derek lead. Black excellence. System not broken. It was built this way. Every tweet, every post was a digital act of protest and celebration. For every whisper that had told him to stay quiet, a million shouted back. Derek Cole had become something Drexler couldn't control. Undeniable. In the Drexler boardroom, however, control was exactly what they wanted back. Tyler Vex's live stream stunt had backfired. The board had expected a slick spin, maybe even an opportunity to offload blame. But Tyler's appearance wearing a Pathron Robotics badge during an ongoing investigation triggered immediate legal scrutiny. Hours after the demo disaster, Drexler's PR team issued a terse statement. Tyler Vex has been terminated for breach of trust and violation of confidentiality. Drexler Innovations will fully cooperate with authorities in any investigation moving forward. But that was it. No charges. No arrest. Tyler simply disappeared, erased from company records. His office emptied by security in under an hour. Whispers said his uncle had cut a deal. Others claimed Pathron had already moved him offshore. Either way, Derek saw it for what it was. White-collar vanishing. Meanwhile, Natalie called Derek into her office. He arrived in his usual unassuming way. No entourage, no PR rep, just the same backpack slung over one shoulder, the quiet dignity that had carried him through fire. Her office was unusually silent. She didn't stand when he walked in. Close the door, she said. He did. I owe you more than an apology, she started. You didn't just stop a disaster. You exposed how deep the rot went. Derek sat across from her. Calm. I didn't do it for Drexler. I know, she said. That's why it mattered. She reached into a folder on her desk and slid a contract across the table. Permanent Director of Systems Integrity. You'd oversee protocol development, test labs, and our next-gen robotics projects. Full control of your team. Public-facing role. Double your current rate. Derek didn't move. I'm not flattered, he said quietly. I'm just tired. Natalie leaned forward. Then name your terms. He didn't hesitate. I want an innovation program, he said. Not just R&D. I want funding, resources, and a pipeline that supports black engineers, Latino coders, women in AI, anyone who's never been given the ladder, let alone a rung. Natalie blinked. Derek continued. You want this company to survive? You start building a place where people like me don't have to burn their fingerprints off the glass just to be seen. Silence filled the room like smoke. Make it minority-led, he added. No token leadership. No photo ops. Power. Real power. She looked away for a long time. Out the window. At the city they both pretended not to despise. I'm gonna get calls, she said finally. From board members. Investors. They'll accuse me of being political. Of creating division. Derek's voice was level. You mean they'll accuse you of correcting something they benefited from? Another long pause. Then she nodded. Fine. I'll greenlight it. Relief didn't wash over Derek. Only confirmation. The next part of the battle would be harder. But this was the crack in the wall. He reached for the contract. But before he could sign it, Natalie spoke again softly, like a confession. There's something you need to know. He paused, pen hovering. The board, they already voted to sell the robotics division. Derek stared at her. They've been negotiating with Pathrun, behind closed doors. Not just Tyler. Charles Vex, David Thorne, several others. They were planning to let the prototype fail, tank our value, and force my resignation. Then merge the IP with Pathrun's. His hand dropped from the pen. They still might, she added. Even after what you did. Derek felt the room tilt. Everything. The sabotage, the spyware, the override, hadn't been about discrediting him. He'd just been collateral. The real goal had always been corporate cannibalism. They were going to kill the whole division, he murmured. Natalie nodded. They still can. Unless you make this program bulletproof. Fast. Before Derek could respond, Natalie's assistant burst through the door, pale and breathless. There's a media van outside. They're not here for an interview. They're here with a subpoena. Derek didn't speak for several seconds after the assistant's breathless warning. The word subpoena hit the room like a sudden shift in gravity. Natalie stood quickly. Who issued it? Local court, sealed documents, the assistant replied. But the guy handing it off said it relates to the Drexler-Pathrun merger investigation. The room fell still. Derek's stomach tightened. It wasn't a subpoena for Natalie. It was for him. He could feel it. Every time he got close to shifting the foundation, the system reloaded its defenses. This was the corporate immune response. Don't fix it. Eliminate the one pointing it out. Once the assistant left, Natalie closed the blinds. She faced Derek, her expression now entirely stripped of CEO polish. They never wanted you here, she said plainly. The board brought you in as a chess piece. You were never supposed to stay. You were just supposed to fix the robot long enough to make the division look viable, so they could sell it for more. Derek's breath caught. So that's what I was? A valuation bump? Natalie didn't look away. At first, yes. Her honesty burned more than if she'd denied it.
I vouched for you to the board, she continued. But only because you gave them leverage. They thought the rogue genius image would make the division trend online. They didn't think you'd last a week.
And when I did, he asked bitterly, they started calling me reckless. Told me I was letting emotion override equity. They used your Caltech file against me. One even said, he's a symbol, not a solution. Derek turned his back to her, staring out the window. Everything made sense now. The subtle tension, the unexplained hostility, the carefully controlled praise that always came with caveats. They had never wanted him here. He had been used, strategically, efficiently, like a tool. I should have walked away after I fixed the first flaw, he muttered. I should have known better. You should have, she agreed. He turned, surprised at her lack of defense. But you didn't, she added. You stayed. You fixed what 15 engineers couldn't. You built a team of interns into a real dev unit. You exposed a board member's sabotage and stopped a multi-million-dollar launch from turning into a homicide investigation. She stepped closer. And now everyone in this company follows you. Not me, not the board, you. Derek shook his head slowly.
That doesn't change what you all did.
No, Natalie said. But it gives you a choice. He didn't take the elevator when he left. He needed the walk. The rhythm, the pressure of his heels against steel stairs. He made it to the second floor when he ran into Jalisa, flanked by a cluster of interns. Her expression shifted when she saw him. Somewhere between worry and determination. They told us, she said. About the subpoena. About the vote. Derek nodded once. It's fine, I was never really part of their plan. That's the problem, Jalisa replied. Then she turned. And behind her, nearly 24 employees, most young, most diverse, most overlooked, stood shoulder to shoulder. We're walking out, she said, until they revoke the vote to sell, until they drop the subpoena, until they acknowledge you as the leader of this division. Derek's eyes flicked across their faces. You think that'll change anything, he asked, voice low. No, she replied, but it'll show them we're not going back in time. He looked again. An Indian coder holding a Set Derek lead sign. A Latina systems analyst clutching a handwritten note. We build truth, not power. 2 interns. 1 trans, 1 neurodiverse. Standing close, shaking, but unflinching. And at the front, Jaleesa, eyes lit like fire. He exhaled, emotions swimming somewhere between pride and grief. Then let's walk, he said. And they did. Natalie watched it unfold from her office window. First 10, then 20, then over 30 staff pouring into the Drexler courtyard. The media, still camped outside, caught it instantly. A live broadcast began.
Headlines updated.
Drexler walkout sparks protest over systemic exploitation. Employees demand full control for Derek Cole. Inside the boardroom, chaos erupted. Charles Vex screamed over speakerphone. David Thorne threatened to freeze funding. One member demanded Natalie resign. Instead, she stood.
I back Derek, she said clearly. You want to sell the robotics arm? Fine. You'll sell it without your staff, your prototype, or your press reputation.
The silence that followed was thunderous. Then she added, or you let him lead it. Completely. 30 minutes later, Natalie found Derek outside. She handed him a new folder. Inside, a revised contract. Executive Director, Drexler Robotics. Not interim, not consultant. Full control. You win, she said, watching him read it. They agreed. Out of fear. Out of shame. Doesn't matter. It's yours. He stared at it. But, he asked, sensing her tone. There's one final test, she said. Derek's brow lifted. Rebuild the prototype. Completely. 3 days. In front of investors. With full transparency. No PR team. Just your code and your people. She paused. If you pull it off, they'll back the program. They'll fund your innovation pipeline. If not,
They'll shut it all down, he finished.
she nodded. Everything. Derek looked down at the contract, then up at the courtyard full of people who had walked for him, and whispered, then we build it together. But as he turned, his phone vibrated. A new message blinked on screen. Pathron has just filed a patent claim, using your original design. The message blinked on Derek's screen, like a warning flare. Pathron has just filed a patent claim, using your original design. He stared at it, unmoving, as the courtyard behind him erupted into cheers over his promotion. But inside, everything went quiet. He opened the attachment. Sure enough, the design Pathron filed bore striking similarities to the early code Derek had written. Raw sketches, algorithm patterns, and submarine architecture he had uploaded months ago in a private Drexler test folder. The same test folder Tyler had access to. The same one Derek thought he'd purged. Now it had resurfaced with a rival company's logo stamped across it. Natalie stepped beside him and saw the screen.
They filed it today, she said.
Strategically, right after the board signed off on your contract. Derek exhaled slowly, rage tightening in his chest. They're baiting us, trying to invalidate anything I build now by claiming it's derivative of their new IP. Natalie nodded. Unless you build something completely new, publicly, transparently, with witnesses. He turned to her, voice steady. Then that's what I'll do. They gave him 7. If Derek and his team could present a fully functional prototype, built from the ground up, using none of the stolen designs, Drexler Robotics would remain independent, fully funded, with him in command. If they failed, the division would be dissolved, sold to Pathron as planned. No do-overs, no appeals. One last trial. He gathered his team in the lab that same evening. Jaleesa stood at his side. Micah brought his laptop, silent but determined. More interns arrived. Some who had walked out with him, others who had never spoken to him but now looked at him like he was their last hope. Derek didn't stand on ceremony. I'm not gonna lie to you, he began. This is near impossible. We're not just building a robot, we're building a message. One that says we're worth trusting, worth funding, worth following. He paused. If we fail, they take everything we've built. They take the jobs, the program, the truth. Jaleesa stepped forward. So we don't fail. And that was it. No speeches, no handshakes, just action. For 3 days, the Drexler lab became something entirely new. A war room, a sanctuary, a battlefield of ideas. Cables spilled across the floor like vines. Empty energy drink cans stacked like monuments. Code scrolled endlessly across glass panels. People slept on yoga mats, on rolled-up coats, on piles of printouts. Derek didn't sleep at all. He coded, designed, rewired. Micah built a modular failsafe system using dual-signal interrupts. Jaleesa restructured the AI's response pattern with predictive ethics, something not even Pathron had developed yet. One intern designed a voice assist module using open source empathy algorithms. Another built a failover UI in 3 hours flat. It wasn't just fast, it was brilliant. Diverse minds, diverse experiences, no ego, just pure, relentless momentum. At one point, Jaleesa walked past Derek at 2:30 a.m., both of them bleary-eyed, and said, "If this is what innovation looks like, why did they ever try to build it without us?" He smiled, barely, because they were building something to control. We're building something to change. By the morning of the third day, the prototype stood in the center of the room, sleek, human-shaped, its outer shell unfinished but glowing with internal precision. The new Drexler robot, D-Unity 1, was smarter, safer, and cheaper than anything the company had ever built. The failsafes had triple redundancy. The AI couldn't be hijacked. Every movement was smooth, tested, predictable, but adaptable. The final hours were spent polishing, documenting, uploading logs to a public ledger, so there could be no accusations of backdating or IP theft. They streamed the final assembly process live, and within minutes, thousands tuned in to watch a group of interns, coders, and one so-called delivery guy do what an entire board of executives had failed to do for years.
Build something real.
The investor showcase was scheduled for 3. By 2:59, the room was packed. Investors, reporters, analysts, even a few silent board members sitting in the back, arms crossed. Natalie took the stage briefly, but she didn't introduce the prototype. She introduced Derek. He walked on stage in a plain black hoodie and jeans, eyes clear, voice calm. "I'm not gonna waste your time," he said. "This isn't about hype. This is about proof." He nodded to Jaleesa, who activated the prototype. The robot walked forward, fluid, poised. It lifted a glass of water, scanned a QR code, identified every face in the front row. It adapted to environmental changes, responded to human interaction, and most importantly, shut down the moment its sensors encountered a command conflict. Everything worked perfectly. The room erupted in applause. Investors leaned forward, whispering urgently to assistants. Natalie watched from the edge of the room, her fists unclenching for the first time in weeks. After the demo, Derek walked off stage to a chorus of congratulations. But his face didn't show celebration, because his phone buzzed again. He looked down at the screen. Natalie stood beside him, scanning his reaction. "Something wrong?" she asked. He nodded once. "The board just called Pathrun," he said, "and they weren't congratulating us." She stared at him. "What did they say?" He turned the phone toward her. An anonymous message forwarded from an insider on the board. "Get rid of her, before she makes Cole untouchable." Natalie's phone rang at that exact moment. She answered, and went pale. When she hung up, she looked Derek in the eyes, and whispered, "They just fired me." Natalie's hand trembled slightly, as she lowered the phone. Derek watched her, face unreadable, jaw clenched. "They just fired me," she said quietly. Effective immediately. He didn't speak, not because he lacked words, but because he'd already seen this play before, just not on this scale. Natalie Drexler, the woman who had stood beside him when the whole system wanted him gone, was now erased with a single phone call. Not investigated, not reprimanded, just erased. In corporate America, this was how power protected itself, by removing the witness, not the wound. "I built this division," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I held the doors open while they slammed them behind me." "They were never yours," Derek said. "They were just on loan." She looked up at him, then at the stage where the new prototype stood glowing, humming softly in the aftermath of its flawless demo. "They'll try to kill the program," she said. "Now that it works, now that it proves you work." "I know," he replied. "And you?" she asked. "What are you going to do?" Derek glanced at the crowd, still lingering in the investor suite. Journalists whispering behind cameras, staffers packing up equipment, board members avoiding eye contact. Then he looked at Jaleesa, who stood near the exit with Micah and 2 interns, waiting, watching. He exhaled.
I'm going to burn the silence.
Within hours, news of Natalie's dismissal leaked, but this time, it didn't stay internal. Because someone no one claimed credit released the walkout video. The footage of Derek being told he was a pawn, of Jaleesa standing defiantly before executives, of the dozens of Drexler employees filing out of the building in quiet protest. It was raw. It was powerful. It was damning. And it went viral. Overnight, it was reshared by Black engineers, immigrant coders, tech activists, student groups, even a few CEOs brave enough to break the omerta of the executive class. Within 48 hours, it reached Congress. The Congressional Black Caucus released a statement calling for an immediate inquiry into racial bias in technology startups and venture-backed firms. Then came the subpoena. But not for Derek, for Tyler Vex. His name had been included in a sealed legal complaint submitted to the FTC, listing insider sabotage, collusion with rival firms, and attempted suppression of whistleblower reports. Under oath, in a closed-door federal hearing, Tyler cracked. It took less than 2 hours. He admitted to embedding sabotage code, admitted to leaking Derek's Caltech file to the media, admitted that his uncle Charles Vex had promised him ownership of the robotics division if he could make Derek appear unstable. When asked if the board had knowledge of the sabotage, he hesitated, then answered, "Some of them did." It made headlines before the transcripts were even released. Derek sat alone in a small green room behind a live-streamed congressional tech ethics panel, waiting for his name to be called. His palms didn't sweat. His knees didn't shake. He'd waited a long time for the truth to matter. When he took the stand, the room quieted, not out of respect but out of fear. "Mr. Cole," the panel chair said, "why do you think these systems keep failing?" Derek's eyes swept the room. "Because they were never designed to succeed with us in them." Gasps. Phones tapping. He continued. "They don't fail because the code is bad. They fail because the culture behind the code is worse. You can't debug racism with new hardware. You can't patch exclusion with PR. You have to rebuild it all from people to power to priorities." He didn't speak in metaphors. He didn't raise his voice. But when he finished, the room stood. Not because it was policy, but because it was undeniable. Back at Drexler, chaos turned to fragmentation. Half the board resigned within a month of the testimony. Shareholders withdrew from Pathron's acquisition bid after leaked transcripts exposed corporate misconduct. Charles Vex vanished from public view. His name was quietly removed from several VC websites, and the people who'd built the impossible, they rose. Jaleesa accepted a senior AI research offer at a social impact tech firm in Oakland. Micah was hired by an international robotics collective, focused on disaster relief. Every intern on Derek's original team got job offers, real ones, with salary, with benefits, with respect. When asked about Derek, they all said the same thing. He didn't just show us how to build. He showed us how to belong. Then, one evening, weeks after the storm settled, Derek returned to his apartment and found a flat envelope on his doormat. No return address, no markings, just a Caltech seal, slightly faded, pressed into the center. He froze. It had been years. He carried it inside, turned it over in his hands. Inside was a letter, typed, short. "Mr. Cole, we owe you an apology. You were right. We were wrong. We hope this begins to repair what we broke. Enclosed is what should have never been taken from you." He opened the second page. It was a diploma. Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, awarded retroactively with full honors. Signed by the university president. There was a sticky note attached. Handwritten. "If you're ever willing to teach, we have a position waiting. You've already taught the world more than we ever did." Derek didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just placed the envelope on his desk, next to the specs for D-Unity 1, and whispered, "Too late to fix the past, but not too late to build something better." The next morning, as he prepared for work, a news alert flashed across his phone. Pathron Robotics under federal investigation, found using AI systems traced to stolen Drexler prototype. But the real shock came in the final line. Natalie Drexler subpoenaed to testify. Her silence may decide the fate of Coltech. The sunlight filtered through the wide windows of the new workspace, glass, steel, exposed brick, and the scent of something new being born. It wasn't a corporate tower or a sterile lab. It was a space built for building, for change. Coltech, a name that had once only existed as a late-night dream scribbled in notebooks, now lit up in brushed aluminum lettering above the entrance. Below it, people entered with hope in their eyes, code on their fingertips, and a fight still in their hearts. Derek Cole stood inside, watching it unfold. Jaleesa walked beside him, tablet in hand, now serving as director of equity engineering. Her badge read co-founder. She wore it like armor. Micah stood across the lab, laughing with a new group of interns. 2 girls from Detroit, one first-gen Haitian American coder from Atlanta, and a blind systems analyst from Phoenix, using haptic feedback on a new interface prototype. It wasn't a team. It was a movement. A week earlier, Caltech had reached out again, this time through official channels. They'd offered Derek reinstatement, an honorary degree, and a public apology delivered in front of the school's largest engineering symposium. They even added funding $5 million in unrestricted grant money to seed whatever initiative he saw fit. He read the email twice, then declined the reinstatement with a single line. Your apology means more without your revision. But he accepted the money. Because ideas didn't need forgiveness. They needed fuel. With that funding and a matched grant from a tech equity coalition, Caltech launched as a not-for-profit accelerator for marginalized engineers, ethical AI developers, and underrepresented technologists. They offered full residencies, mentorships, prototype funding, and most importantly, ownership. Derek refused to take a salary his first year. Instead, he directed those funds toward housing stipends and parental support for the first cohort. No one was excluded. No one had to explain their identity at the door. And when asked what the program was really about, Derek simply said, "It's not about access. It's about power, and who gets to have it without begging." Elsewhere, Natalie Drexler, no longer at Drexler Innovations, launched a new firm, Terity Systems, focused on social impact robotics, ethical manufacturing, and workforce rehabilitation technology. The firm quickly attracted attention not for its tech, but for its board, because sitting quietly among that list of names, Derek Cole. Their relationship had evolved, no longer strained by hierarchy, but charged with mutual respect. She knew he didn't trust systems anymore. She respected him for it. "Why'd you say yes?" she asked him at the first board meeting. He replied, "Because people still think I'm a fluke. But if I'm at two companies when change happens, they'll have to call it a trend." 3 months later, Caltech launched its first public demo. Not a robot, not a drone, not some gleaming piece of capitalistic distraction. They revealed an open-source software framework that allowed students to build AI models from outdated hardware, tools that could run real logic on school-issued laptops without any cloud dependency or corporate licenses. They called it Ground Zero. It was shared free. No patents, no NDA, no terms of use beyond. Build something better. Within weeks, over 200 high schools in underserved districts began using it. Tech giants called it unsustainable. Derek called it non-negotiable. On a quiet Friday morning, Derek stepped into a delivery van. Not his, but borrowed. It was symbolic. He told Jaleesa he needed to run something over to a local tech firm they were partnering with. "Want me to go instead?" she asked. He shook his head. "I need this one." He loaded a plain brown box into the passenger seat, climbed in, and drove across the city. Same streets, same potholes. But now he moved through them, like someone who'd finally arrived, not at a destination, but at a decision to own it all. The mistakes, the labels, the lost time, and the fact that every version of him, the dropout, the delivery guy, the so-called risk, had always been enough. He pulled up to a small startup in Fremont, specializing in neuro-assistive wearables. As he entered the lobby, a young black intern with locks and thick-rimmed glasses looked up from the desk. He blinked. Then again. "Wait," the intern stammered. "Wait, are you Derek Cole?" Derek raised an eyebrow. "That's what the mail label says." "You changed everything. Caltech, the launch, the congressional hearing, Ground Zero, that was you." Derek smiled, placed the package on the counter. "I just fix broken things," he said. "But you built Caltech," the intern added, breathless. "You were on the cover of Wired. They call you..." Derek cut him off gently, leaning in just slightly, a quiet twinkle in his eye. "No," he said. "I'm just the delivery guy." The intern laughed, half in disbelief, half in awe. Derek nodded once, turned, and walked out the door. No one should have to prove their humanity just to be believed. If you've ever felt the weight of being judged before being heard, type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this story broke your heart, because silence protects the system.